On October 28, 1990, 13 American reconnaissance soldiers crossed into a forgotten concrete facility codenamed A-42, a bunker hidden near the German-Belgian border. The Cold War was technically over. The Berlin Wall had fallen, but intelligence whispers suggested this site had once been used for illegal medical experimentation on children, and rumors swirled that activity still continued under cover of retreating paramilitary forces. The 13 men and women who entered were meant to secure it. Only one came out. That was Ruth Hawthorne, a nurse-turned-covert operative who had been drafted into special missions after surviving horrors on the edges of NATO's Balkan operations. She emerged after 6 hours, bloodied from head to toe, silent as grave dirt, and refusing to say what happened. 3 days later, Ruth herself vanished. The Army declared her deceased, the file stamped "Killed in Action." The site was sealed with concrete slabs, and every page relating to A-42 went into classified archives with a blackout order for 15 years. 15 years later, in 2005, an elderly schoolteacher named Dorothy Mills died peacefully in Indianapolis. Her family remembered her as a devout woman who baked pies, volunteered at church, and never missed a Sunday Mass. While helping to sort her belongings, her granddaughter broke through a patched section of wall in the basement and found a narrow, hidden room. Inside stood a cabinet and a trunk heavy with secrets. There were 43 black and white photographs showing dead men in uniforms, all taken between 1991 and 2004. There were surveillance logs written in harsh, blocky English peppered with fragments of German. And there was a leather journal with a first page bearing a confession. My name was Ruth Hawthorne. I was the ghost. I did not die in that bunker. I discovered something that made me disappear. What followed in the journal and in the story pieced from official fragments revealed why Ruth chose to erase her name, why she stalked men across 3 continents for over a decade, and why she died under another name. The story really began in September of 1990, in the tumult of ethnic conflict breaking out along the borderlands of Kosovo. NATO had only just stepped into observer and medical support roles, leaving small medical stations scattered and poorly defensible. Field Med Station 7, outside Mitrovica, was a 3-room clinic packed with 23 wounded Americans evacuated from skirmishes. Ruth Hawthorne had worked 36 hours continuously, stitching burst arterial wounds, changing dressings, soothing boys younger than her own brother, running on nothing but bitter coffee and duty. Medicine in those months often meant keeping men alive for another hour, even though both doctor and nurse knew they would not last the night. At dawn, as she adjusted a private's IV drip, she heard the rumble of engines outside. They were heavy army trucks, too fast, too aggressive. Her supervising surgeon muttered, "At last, resupply." But Ruth knew the cadence of friendly engines. Instinct told her something darker was arriving. Moments later, the double doors banged open. 12 Serbian paramilitary fighters entered without hesitation, rifles hanging low, postures frighteningly casual as though they owned the place. Their commander was strikingly young, no older than 25, with a scar through his eyebrow and blue eyes that looked at people as though they were already corpses. He demanded their stocks of morphine, sulfa, bandages, his English broken but clear. The Serbian surgeon opposed him with trembling outrage, citing the Red Cross neutrality of the clinic. The Serbian looked at his clipboard, stepped toward the nearest bed where a soldier barely conscious from shrapnel surgery lay, and shot him clean in the head. The crack of that pistol shattered sanity. Patients screamed, thrashed, tried to crawl away on broken limbs. Those who could not move stared in mute horror as one by one the commander methodically executed the names on his list. When Dr. Harrison lunged to protect them, he was held by 2 men and his throat opened neatly with a knife. His eyes fixed on Ruth, silently mouthing, "Hide." Her body obeyed before she even decided, stumbling backward into a supply closet where she held the door half closed and gagged her own sobs with shaking hands. Through the thin cracks she saw everything. 23 young Americans who had survived battles only to be lined up and dispatched in less than 15 minutes. Private Morrison tried to reach the rifle hidden under his cot, but was gunned twice before he could close his fingers. He had been 19, from Iowa, often showing Ruth love letters from a girl named Betty back home. When the killers left with their looted crates of medicine, the silence was worse than the shooting. Ruth forced herself to wait another 20 minutes, then emerged into a ward of stillness so heavy that the sound of dripping blood became unbearable. She checked every bed, even though she already knew they were all gone. Something inside her shifted when she pried Morrison's rifle from beneath his body. It still held his body's warmth. She had once promised her father to never use a weapon, that she was born to save lives, not take them. But as she held the rifle across her chest, she knew she would never again be only a nurse. She tracked the Serbian squad across ruined villages by following the muddy tire impressions in the wet soil, just as her father once had taught her to follow deer trails in the Pennsylvania woods. When she caught up with them, they were sharing stolen medical supplies in an abandoned settlement. Through Morrison's carefully oiled scope, she watched the commander smoke a cigarette, the whistler hum the same tune he had whistled while killing, the knife man calmly polishing the blade that had slit Harrison's throat. She no longer felt the weight of morality. Through the cool circle of the scope, her breathing slowed. She placed the shot not for speed, but for pain, beneath the vest, in the stomach, a place where he would know he was dying. She did not flinch as she squeezed the trigger. The commander folded as though dragged by invisible hands. She dropped 2 more men before the others found cover, and then she was moving, reloading, hunting. For 3 days she picked off the remainder. 2 threw long-range shots across 300 yards, one with the very knife that had killed Harrison. Others ambushed in barns and fields. She left Morrison's playing cards on each body. 2 of hearts, 3 of clubs, 4 of diamonds, 5 of spades, on and on. Survivors whispered of a phantom stalking them. By September 20th, 11 of the 12 were dead. The 12th would be killed incidentally by stray artillery, but Ruth did not know this. She already accepted that she would spend every ounce of strength hunting them until she finished. Rumors grew. Serbian radio chatter spoke of Du, the ghost, an unseen American operative leaving cards on corpses. Panic hit disproportionate to the tactical value. Whole squads altered routes to avoid an unseen predator. By the time Intel intelligence finally intercepted her, she had scored nearly 50 confirmed kills in 2 weeks, almost all precision headshots and ambushes. She denied feeling satisfaction, but deep inside she recognized the terrifying perfection of her new role. One October evening, her handler, known only as Control, placed a map before her. There was chatter about a convoy marked with medical insignia ferrying children toward a hidden installation. They wanted her to trail it, harass their guard units, sow panic, and determine where they went. This was her unofficial contract: cooperate or be court-martialed as a deserter. Ruth didn't answer with words. She merely loaded Morrison's rifle and nodded once. For 2 nights she stalked the convoy. The trucks carried children aged 8 to 14, examined with tape measures and needles like livestock. Under torchlight, a bespectacled doctor took constant notes. Ruth recorded their pattern, then struck. By dawn, 20 children had been freed from cages. 10 guards lay cold around scattered trucks. Only the medical staff remained, and under interrogation, Ruth learned the existence of Bunker A42, hidden 40 kilometers away, where a dozen children already underwent Phase 3. She was warned she was too late. The procedures had begun. When she infiltrated the bunker through a rusted drainage grate, she expected nightmares. She found worse. Deep beneath the concrete, she crept past surgical theaters where children's small torsos lay opened under bright lights, while doctors whispered as if fixing machines. She passed cells where 3 terrified faces pressed against glass, one bandaged, another's arm disturbingly elongated as though bone had grown too fast. In the central chamber were tanks full of murky liquid. Shapes floated inside, some half-human, their limbs misshapen, their throats fitted with tubes, yet their eyes painfully aware. They were still alive. Dr. Hoffman, the lead researcher she had wounded days before, whispered defiantly that she was looking at the future, that these children were evolution. She shot his knees out, ignoring his science and his screams, and destroyed everything she could reach with stolen charges and bullets. She freed who she could, carried the smallest across her back, cut through layers of fire as reinforcements were drawn outside. Control arrived at last, cursing that she had not waited, that valuable intelligence had been lost. For Ruth, it was not intelligence, it was innocence brutally violated. She understood that they had never intended to destroy A42, only to capture it. Something inside her clenched. She'd seen documents hinting Americans already had copies of the data. She realized her existence as an operative had been manipulated from the start. So she chose to vanish. She forged identity papers, fled to Switzerland, and by early 1991, the ghost huntress was buried in official records while Dorothy Mills, grieving widow from Ohio, appeared in Zurich with flawless forged documentation. She deposited Nazi gold, rings, and teeth she'd stolen from her prey to fund what came next. The next stage of her life was a crusade across continents. In Italy, she tracked a former researcher posing as a kindly village doctor. She ambushed him returning from delivering a baby, his last words an astonished, "Ghost." In Argentina, she dismantled a network of escaped officers calling themselves the Organization, assassinating one by one with poison or blade. In Brazil, she executed administrators who had requisitioned children for experiments, but disguised their lives beneath respectable clinical practices. Over the next 15 years, she killed 43 such figures. She married once under her cover, bore a child, raised a family in suburban United States, but behind the domestic mask, she slipped away from missions and returned smiling, hands still steady. By the early 2000s, she was an old woman, body ravaged by cancer, likely induced by radiation exposure in Nevada, where she had disrupted a later American successor program in the 60s. Even then, she had crept into sublevels to free children dosed with experimental drugs, torching research transfers before vanishing once more into the civilian mask of Dorothy Mills. Always she kept evidence hidden. Journals chronicling her kills, photographs of every officer she eliminated, meticulous surveillance logs. When she died on October 28, 2005, the exact 15th anniversary of the night she walked from A42, her family only remembered the sweetness of apple pies and kind lessons at church. But behind her basement wall, her granddaughter found the truth that Dorothy Mills had once been Ruth Hawthorne, the ghost of A42, a woman with 134 total kills across war zones, who dedicated her life to hunting those who sought to turn children into weapons. The revelation unsettled and horrified in equal measure. To her family, this quiet Midwestern grandmother had lived a whole double existence. To history, her files proved the continuation of experiments long after the Cold War. To Ruth herself, her journal confessed regret, especially one entry that still bled from the page. Ideas do not die when you kill men. They die when you expose them to light. I have killed too many trying to burn out an idea. Perhaps the next generation will know how to do better. That last line became an inheritance more dangerous than any weapon. Because the hidden files didn't merely document Ruth's revenge, they exposed the complicity of governments that had harbored, replicated, and benefited from research carried out on innocent children. Dorothy Mills' death was not the end of the story. It was a door creaking open, letting the ghost she carried spill into a world unprepared for them.